Welcome to Twice 5 Miles Radio, fertile ground for conversations worth listening to and remembering. I'm your host, James Navé, always airing first on Radio Asheville, WPVM FM 103.7, streaming online, WPVMFM.org, also airing in Taos on KCEI Cultural Energy Radio. And you'll find Twice 5 Miles Radio on all the podcast platforms as well under Twice 5 Miles Radio. So today my guest is Donald Graham. Don is an internationally recognized photographer who works in the worlds of fashion, movies, music, magazines, and advertising. His work is in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, the International Center of Photography in New York, and the Detroit Institute of Arts Museum. His work has appeared in over 500 publications. His book, One of a Kind, is available on Amazon and in bookstores. One of a Kind has won over 40 international awards. We met a few weeks back in Taos, New Mexico, at an after party. I had been hosting an event at the Taos Community Auditorium, and we went down to the Hotel Willa afterwards, and this fellow sat down with me, and we started talking about light and imagery and photography. His name is Donald Graham, and he couldn't have been more excited about the idea of living in the world and capturing images, telling stories, being out and about, reporting on what he sees. And as we spoke, I became more and more interested in what he was up to. And so I couldn't resist. I asked Don to meet for coffee, or he asked me. I don't know quite how that worked. We sat down and started talking about all kinds of things a couple of days ago. And I invited him to come on Twice 5 Miles Radio. And the thing that most intrigued me about my conversation with Don, he had this image of two mountain lions that he had recorded on his property in Taos, New Mexico. And I can't get those images out of my mind, nor can I get the conversation out of my mind. So Don Graham, welcome to Twice 5 Miles Radio.
Well, James, it's a pleasure to be here. We met for coffee, and I think it ended up being 2.5 hours. So it was a great conversation.
I can't help it, Don. I brought up the mountain lions, and I'm watching you on the Zoom call, although the listeners hear it on the radio. And behind you, blue skies, some fluffy white clouds, and the New Mexico territory, the mountains. Give me a little brief on how you know about these mountain lions on your property, and then we can go from there to wherever the lions might lead us.
Well, first of all, I love living in Taos, and especially living back here in the mountains in Taos. I'd spent about 12 years doing road trips through the United States, trying to figure out where would I like to have as a place to live outside of the city. I lived 25 years in New York and 15 years in Los Angeles. So I'm 5 miles up a dirt road, 4 miles past the last neighbor. Out my back door, we have mountains, as you can see, a lot of wildlife that includes mountain lions. A few years back, somebody said, "Oh, you should get a game camera, see if there's anything out there." So I went out and got one of these game cameras, put it up on a tree. And 2 weeks later, I went down and pulled the chip out of the game camera, put it in my computer. And the very first video was 3 mountain lions walking past the camera. And I have been addicted since then. I now have 28 cameras situated all over the property, on game trails, on roads, anywhere where I think is a likely place that you would see animals. I have a pretty good view of how many animals are on the property these days. And I was telling you that last summer we had 5 mountain lions and 5 bears on the property. This year we only have 1 mountain lion. I think I have 3 bears. Still early in the summer. I'm not sure exactly because the bears sleep until about April. And so they don't even get out and start roaming around. But I saw one 2 days ago. I think it was when I was driving down to meet you.
Lazy old bears don't get up till April. We could follow suit with that. You said you live 4 miles up a dirt road past your last neighbor. That puts you squarely in the wilderness. You're in the minority from an animal point of view. All the rest of these characters, lots of bears, lots of mountain lions, and then here Don sits right in the middle of all of it. How did you manage to end up that far back? And why is that so appealing to you since you're a city fellow.
I'm a city fellow in the sense that a city is a wonderful place to work. I'm a photographer. And as a photographer and the kind of work that I do, a city is where it happens because I photograph people. I work in the fashion, movie, music, and advertising industries. However, when I do things that are for my spirit, I've always gone up in height. I love living in Los Angeles because Sierra Nevada is an amazing mountain range. And I've spent over 300 nights camped in the Sierra Nevada. And so when I started on this series of road trips to decide where I'd like to live, one of the criteria is I wanted to live in wilderness and I wanted to live ideally 30 minutes away from a town that had good people, was on the progressive side, had good restaurants, and a place I would just love being. And so I spent 12 years, came up with a list of about 5 places that I wanted to explore in depth, and finally decided on Taos. I went into a realtor in Taos. I'm looking for mountain land that's park-like, that's way away from people. Do you have anything like that? And she said, what we doing? We have one thing that sounds exactly like it. She says, we're going to have to walk the last mile because the road doesn't go all the way to the property. It sounds kind of like what you're talking about. And so we went up there and I looked at it and I go, this is amazing land. Why is it so cheap? And how long has it been on the market? And she goes, oh, not long, not long. And I said, well, how long is not long? That could be 6 months. That could be a year. Oh, she goes, oh, no, it's probably been, I'm not sure, 8 or 10 years, something like that. I go, 8 or 10 years that no one's wanted to buy this? She goes, well, you have to be a special kind of person. And I go, this conversation's not really helping very much. But anyway, so I bought this land that was way back and built a road to it and basically dug a well with the help of a dowser, water witch. And that was about 25 years ago.
And you now have access to how many thousands of acres, did you tell me?
Well, the access, it kind of depends on my willingness to walk a long way. The property has grown over the 25 years that I've been here. Well, I had one person who came to me and he had gotten land through quieting of title, which is a process where if you don't pay your taxes, there's a process where you can apply to the government for the land that hasn't been paid. You have to notify the owners. You have to give them 7 years to pay the taxes. And at the end of 7 years, if they don't pay the taxes, then you can pay the taxes and the land reverts to you. This man, who was a real estate agent, had done this and had collected 1,600 acres. He couldn't get to any of the land because it was way back in, which is probably why people weren't paying the taxes on it. Because me said, well, I want to buy an easement across your property so I can get to it. And I go, well, no, that's not going to happen. And then he said, well, I've got a big amount of money I've got to pay my attorneys. How about if you buy some of the land? I was able to do that at an incredibly low price. I was able to effectively buy a mountain for a couple $100 an acre. So I have a mountain behind me that you can see that has bears and mountain lions, elk and red fox, and then all the regular things like deer and other things that you have. Big predator animals are the mountain lions and the bears.
And so you are the chief executive officer of a very exclusive retreat spa designed especially for the wildness of creatures.
I look at it like I just have neighbors that are a little different than everybody else. And my neighbors, can be anything from ornery to exciting to dangerous. Sometimes they can be all three in the same minute.
Probably describing more than one neighborhood in the world, I would think.
Yeah, okay.
Speaking of the world, when we had our good visit, you spent a great deal of time talking about a lot of the places you've been over your career, your lifetime. You just mentioned I camped out 300 nights in the Sierra Nevadas. I'm curious, can you tell us a bit about when, as a young person, you started to get the itch to go out and look at the world, the road? Did it call to you, or was there something else calling you that took you out there to explore this big place we live on called Earth?
I love adventure. I'm an explorer. I mean, most people that know me well will say, yeah, first and foremost, he's an explorer that thrives on adventure. So I have done trips whenever I could after I graduated from college. I mean, I've had some pretty tough work schedules over the years. My very first trip, I was working in Seattle. This was my very first job after college and had 3 weeks off. I said, well, I haven't really spent much time in California. Let me go to California. But I didn't have much money at the time. So I hitchhiked to San Diego and got San Diego and go, this isn't that interesting. And so I kept going. I hitchhiked to Guatemala, hitchhiking all the way through Mexico into Guatemala and finally ending up at a place called Lake Atitlan, which was a paradise at that time. It was late 70s. That whetted an appetite, and it also kind of set a bar for pushing yourself on how to travel. A few years after that, spent 6 months traveling through Europe on Eurail Pass, which meant that I wanted to see every country in Europe. And then I took 6 months and I went to Asia. I spent a month trekking through the Himalayas, and that was a phenomenal experience. I trekked around Annapurna. And then I went into India and I spent about 4.5 months in India, which is a life-changing. I always consider that India is the ultimate travel experience for an American because what they excel at, we don't, and what we excel at, they don't. So you really are having a chance to see about as different an approach to life as anywhere. I lived for a while in a Buddhist monastery coming out of that experience, and I've continued to travel. Just this last year, I was in Africa, spent almost a month in Madagascar, which was unbelievable, and Botswana, which was equally unbelievable, but very different. And now that I'm older and don't work 80-hour weeks anymore, I travel a lot more, and I try to do 2 to 3 big trips a year, someplace that I figure that maybe in 10 years I won't be able to go to anymore.
So when we were sitting at Elevation, you were showing me the photographs that you've also taken. So you've earned your living as a photographer as well. How did photography factor into the drive for adventure? What's the relationship between photographing people, images, telling stories by way of film and adventure? How does that work?
I've never thought of it that way. The process of how I became a photographer is I had another career and I had left that and said, well, I'm not going to do this for a series of reasons. And I sat down and said, well, okay, I need to figure out what it is that I am going to do for the rest of my life. And I'm not going to leave this apartment until I figured this out. I put a lot of stress, and I had a series of careers that I considered. And what I did is I sat down and really tried to say to myself, what is the day-to-day experience of each of these careers? And how satisfying at multiple levels is each one of these? And I really tried to score each of them out. After doing this for 3 weeks, and I mean, when I say I was doing this, I mean, I would wake up and I would do this all day and go to bed and get up and do the same thing nonstop. So I decided that to try being a photographer. Not only did I want to be a photographer, I wanted to be a fashion photographer. So I moved to Paris, which is the center of fashion in the world, and worked in a studio there for 3 years with the top fashion photographers in the world, and basically learned photography while I was in Paris.
When you say learn photography, did you just go to the door and knock, knock, knock? Bonjour, monsieur, je suis ici. I'm here to shoot some photographs. Or did you show up with something that was valuable for them? You're an American. You're not a native French speaker. You and I talked about our love for the French language, and I admit that I'm always a perpetual advanced beginner and enjoy it, but I never could, as you said, understand the fast-moving languages in the parties when you go visit somebody and they have a dinner party. How did you manage to get through that door? Is that easier than we would think, or what?
As in all stories, the true story is always more complicated than the first story. When I decided I wanted to be a photographer, at that time I was living in Los Angeles, I decided to go out and try to assist other photographers. I would call up a photographer and go into the studio and do an interview. I did 120 some interviews before I got my first job. And my first job lasted one day. The process was not a simple one. Now, once I had worked for one day with the photographer, it was easier than it had been before. And after that, I was able to start working with a number of other photographers. And I probably worked for 30 photographers over the next 6 months in Los Angeles. It was at that point that I said, what I really want to do is do fashion photography. And I went to Paris and I had some introductions from people. And I went to the first couple of studios and they said, well, you've only worked for 6-8 months with 30 or 40 photographers. We'll keep you in mind. We'll call you. I finally walked into a studio that was a very avant-garde studio in Paris, one of the top 3 or 4 studios, and walked in and told him I was looking for a job as an assistant. And he says to me, I have one question for you. How's your English? And I go, that I'm very, very good at. And he says, you're hired. And I'm going, okay, great. How the heck did I get hired on that? Well, what had happened, apparently, that I heard the next day was that the day before, he had a British photographer who was shooting a cover for Paris Vogue. It was a very big deal. Everyone from Paris Vogue had come in to be there, high profile model, big, 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 big deal. This photographer was a prima donna, and he had met with the assistant 2 days before. The assistant had come in and he says, okay, I want you to bring me those big lights. I can't remember the name of them. They're like kind of like 8-sided or something like that. They're really big. You know exactly what I'm talking about. And get me the good power packs, the ones that are just that are new. It's the new version. I think it's like 680 or 86. I can't remember what the numbers are, but this is your job. You know what these are. And then I need 10. Now make it 20 of those things over there. You see that? And then let's get and he did this explanation to the head assistant. And the next day, he showed up 3 hours late to the photo shoot. So Vogue and everything was there. All the people were there. The models were there. Everything was ready to go. He comes in 3 hours late. He actually danced in. He did kind of a Chuck Berry thing, He came into the studio and, he had an ego. He has this big smile on his face. He looks around and he goes, this isn't what I asked for. Where is this? Where the half the things I've asked for aren't here. And one thing about French people is they're much like Americans in that most French people don't speak English very well, just like most Americans don't speak French very well. And the assistant had understood a certain percentage and probably on the small side of what he had said. And he had been under the influence of certain substances at that time that were being used a lot. And he wasn't exactly articulate himself. He blew up and he says, this studio is the worst studio there ever was. I never will work here again. How can Vogue even book me into a studio like this? This is garbage, How are you going to get all this equipment here? And just threw a complete fit. And the owner of the studio was there for the whole thing. I happened to walk in the next day. He had nobody in there that spoke English as the first language. About half of his photographers chose to communicate in English. He had decided that night that he had to get somebody who spoke English. And I walked in being at the right place at the right time. And I worked there for 3 years.
So when you were working there as the English speaker, hopefully learning how to be a photographer as well, Did you show up at the door with a lot of photography skill? And the reason I'm asking, a lot of people who listen to this show are thinking about maybe shifting. As you said, I had these careers. I sat down, I worked for 3 weeks, decided I wanted to become a photographer, and off I went. And then you qualified it by saying there's a lot more to a story than that. Did you know anything about it? And as you worked with this fellow for 3 years, when did you start to get a sense of how you were going to be part of the photography community? Because you've succeeded rather well. If anybody Googles your name or looks online, they'll see quite a number of accomplishments. But you never start out with a number of accomplishments. You have to build into them. And how did you know when you were really on the right track, headed to this level of excellence that you did indeed achieve throughout your career?
Well, first of all, I had a love of photography from a young age, and my father had taken photographs, and he had used a Hasselblad, which I had a love of photography. But what really made me a good photographer was assisting great photographers, because what you do every day, most of these guys don't have one assistant. They have three. I was doing studio photography. 80% of these shoots were studio shoots. And so you were consistently doing similar things. You were learning 1,000 ways of how to light a subject. And each day was a different way to light, with the goal being equally as interesting, unique, and beautiful as any other. And you had assistants who had been doing this that were solving these problems alongside you. So the learning curve as an assistant was very quick. And each day at the studio, there was 8 studios. And let's say that half of them were English speaking. So I was going to 4 different studios each day and working with 4 different photographers each day. And so you do that over 3 years, learning how to light, learning how to direct a subject, learning how to have a goal for a shoot and how to achieve that goal. All of these people were at the very top of their game. It was fashion and portraiture. It was the process of assisting. I spent 3 years in Paris, add the 6 months of Los Angeles, and I continued even when I came back to the United States to do a little bit of assisting, even during the first part of my career as a photographer. I have to say that the best way to learn any career that a person wants to go into is to find the best in the world and go work with them for 3 years.
Once you moved away from assisting into your own solo work, you became the photographer. Did you end up with assistants working for you doing the same thing? Did you bring other people along? And how did you go about doing that? What's your philosophy on bringing people along in a career that you've succeeded in?
Well, absolutely. I had assistants, and I would have somewhere between 1 and 3 assistants on each shoot, depending on what the budget was. And my philosophy is that first of all, you have to know what you're not good at, and you have to get people that are great at what you're not best at. I'm not a technical person, and so my assistants are genius at technical things. I remember once we were in a shoot in Africa and my primary camera went down. Now I had backup cameras, but I wanted my primary camera. This assistant put a sheet out on the ground, took the camera apart, and put it back together, and it worked. There isn't a chance in the world that I could come anywhere close to being able to do that. He was working with a Hasselblad. This was in the 1990s. So at that time, they had very little electronics in it. So it was something that you could do. He was brilliant on all the things that I was not. People who are successful, I don't care what it is, surround themselves with people that are better than them in some areas. Finding the best possible people that you can is the most important thing you can do in success in anything, in my opinion.
Focus on the eye the decisive moment, all of those photography pieces of advice are really, really good. How did you manage to transition through film into the digital space? And are you still using film in some of your work?
I started changing from film to digital in about 2005, 2006, late to the game. A lot of people were changing around 2000. Again, because it's technical, I was slower than the average. Today, I love digital. I absolutely love working in digital. I shoot everything digital. And some of the things that I love about digital is first, you can see what you shot right away. With film, you would shoot something and you wouldn't know what you had until you got it back from the lab 3 days later. And there's a whole lot of little tiny things that can go wrong. If you're shooting with the strobe, you can have your shutter speed off by one click, and that means that half of all your pictures are black, for example. Plus, you might think that you have the shot and you get the shot back and you go, oh my, that's not what I thought. Being able to see things immediately is a huge thing. A second thing is the digital darkroom is so much better than the old darkroom from my point of view. For one thing, in the old darkroom, there's not that much you can do. I would only print black and white in my old darkroom. And the whole time that you're in there, you're saying to yourself, okay, I'm going to be here for 3 hours. How many days is that going to take off of my life? Because these are all poisonous chemicals that I'm breathing this whole time that I'm in here. So I never had quite the love of the darkroom as some people did. But with a digital darkroom, you can do thousands of things. And let's just take color, which in film, you were limited by the color of the films that you used. And each film would have slightly different color. I didn't really like any of the colors of any of the films, whether it was Fuji or Kodachrome or Ektachrome or Agfa, any of them. But with digital, you can go in and you can create your own palette. That is a very exciting thing because all of a sudden now you are inventing your film effectively. And you can make something that's completely yours, completely unique. I shoot a lot of black and white. I did a book that was black and white portraits called One of a Kind. And black and white is something that I've always loved. I also like color. Color is an entirely different thing because every color brings out an emotion in you. Red brings one emotion. Green brings a different emotion. Yellow, another one. Blue, another. When you're photographing somebody in color, you're not just photographing them, all those colors are having an impact on the person. They are feeling what the yellow is, what the red is, what the blue is, what the green is. And that often distracts from what is the most important part of the photograph, which is really trying to get inside of a person and tell a story that is universal to everyone, a story that each person can go, oh, wow, I can feel what that person is feeling. I've been there. I know that. Wow. In color, if you desaturate, I'm reducing somewhat the power of each of those colors, for example. Or I can just go to black and white. I don't have to worry about it at all. I have a definite preference when I'm photographing people in portraiture. I do have a preference for black and white. Today, I no longer shoot fashion. I focus primarily on portraiture.
When we were first talking at Hotel Willa, you said iPhones all have the same personality. And when you shoot with an iPhone, you're going to get a similar picture personality wise another person would have when they shoot with an iPhone. And then you went on to say different cameras have different characteristics. Could you build a little bit on that?
So we all have habits. We've all been photographed by an iPhone. We all know what we do when a person pulls out an iPhone, points it at us. We have something that we do for that person with the iPhone. I went to the other end of the spectrum and I shot a lot of work with an 8x10 camera. The negative is 8 inches by 10 inches. It's the old style camera from the 1800s where you put the cloth over your head and you're focusing on a ground glass and the image is upside down and backwards. And then when it's time to take the photograph, the person has to be still for, depends on how much light is in the room, but if it's natural light, it could easily be a second. You take the person you photographed with the iPhone, and then you bring them into this other situation where you're shooting with an 8x10 camera, and all of a sudden they go, oh, I can't do what I do with the iPhone. I tell them, I need you to be still. I might say, close your eyes for a little bit. I just want you to get in touch with yourself, see where you're at inside. And when I tell you to open your eyes, look into camera. That process is at the opposite end of the spectrum. And when you're shooting with a big camera like the 8x10 view camera is, it changes the entire mood of the session. It becomes a much more introspective experience for everybody because the process has been slowed down. It's sort of like the difference between photographing somebody at a party and photographing somebody during a meditation session. So the camera that you use has a big impact on what you get. And the photographs that for me are the most meaningful are ones that are introspective. I'm interested in taking photographs that are about who you are as a person when nobody else is around and you are just there with your own thoughts. It's not a performance for the camera.
When we were having coffee a couple of days ago, you showed me a number of the shots you had, and my eye stopped on the fellow who was 12, had his tie on and holding the tattered Bible. And I said, my goodness, that's quite a shot. And you said, that's my favorite. Tell us about why that shot of that young fellow, 12 years old, holding this Bible with bags under his eyes is so compelling to you. And talk a bit about how you captured his interior essence. No performativity at all in that shot.
Well, first of all, in terms of why it's one of my favorites is that I like a photograph that on the surface is simple, but upon examination has great complexity to it. And here is a young boy, maybe 12 years old, shot against a completely white background. So there's nothing to distract you from him. And he is very solemnly looking into the camera with a Bible held in his hand. And the Bible is got maybe 50 bookmarks in it. It's heavily used. And you look up at the boy's eyes, which is really where we look first. And here's a boy who's 12 years old with deep bags under his eyes. And he's an African American boy. And then you look down and you see a tie and it says 40 on the tie. And you go, what's that about? And he's not a happy boy. He's not smiling for the camera. He is solemn. I just find the complexity, the story, the bags under the eyes on a 12-year-old boy to really touch the part of me that has empathy. That's what the photograph brings out, communicates for me. And I think that's what the power is for other people, to be able to look at somebody and experience empathy, and you don't know the story, and your mind tries to finish that story. And that story is a complex story because this is not the Madison Avenue depiction of a 12-year-old boy.
I wonder if the boy suspected God had deserted him or was waiting for God to come, or both. That's where I went with it. And he looked like he could be 90 years old. Those eyes were the eyes of every age that's ever existed, right there in front of us in that stark shot. In some ways, the eyes of the world exist in that photo.
No, it's very well said. Very well said. It's that kind of complexity in a photograph that to me makes it great.
What are you looking for personally, Don, when you pursue that sort of complexity? What do you hope will happen to you in addition to an increase of empathetic sensibilities?
Every person is different. I can attempt to bring out what lies underneath the surface. I have varying degrees of success at doing that. But I have certain things that I've developed over the years that help me to get a person away from performance, away from being the ideal. We live in a society where there's an enormous pressure to live up to certain ideals. Take social media. Social media is all based on a series of ideals that people are trying to emulate. I'm not interested in those. I've seen them a billion times. I don't need to see another fabulous, strong, powerful. The list goes on. You can fill in the blanks. I'm interested in trying to understand who this person is when no one's around to see them. Part of that comes out through conversation that I have with them prior to photographing. Some of that comes out by asking them to be quiet. Some of that comes through asking them to close their eyes and go inside themselves and spend some time. And that when they're ready to come back and join me, there's a number of things that I do to try to get something that to me speaks to the human condition. And the more powerfully it speaks to the human condition, the better the photograph. I know that I have a good photograph when I have chills going down my spine.
Thank you so much for all of those reflections. I wish we had more time. Before we go, please tell us how to engage with your work. I've been to your website, and the picture of the young man I was talking about is featured prominently on your website. So if anybody wants to see it, donaldgraham.com, and you can see the shot of the fellow holding the Bible. What's coming up for you in the future, aside from Dancing with the Mountain Lions you've not seen yet? Where are you headed in the next few months? Anything interesting that people would like to connect with?
Well, I'm doing more work, more fine art work today. I have a new gallery in Santa Fe. I'm doing work with them, which is fun and exciting. I've only been working with them a couple of months now, so this is all new. I also have a gallery in Paris, France, that I've worked with for 20 some years. I'm working with some museums. Last year, the Harwood Museum here in Taos featured a 4 foot by 5 foot photograph I did of Robert Mirabal, who's a Native American musician, flautist. And then I also am working with the museum at Columbia University. Photograph that they're going to be taking into the collection is from a series on Rastafarians that I shot in Jamaica, which has a long story to it that I'm not going to go into, but it involved an artist named Richard Prince. And if you put my name and Richard Prince together in a Google search, you can get about 300 articles. So those are some of the things that I'm working on now. I'm also working on just a new series of photographs that aren't people, because I'm living here in a spectacular country and just trying to make some images that are new and unique and different than other people have done. And I'll tell you, I have a lot of respect for landscape photographers, because trying to do something that's new, unique, and hasn't been done before in landscape is not an easy thing to do. I've got a long ways before I will be able to tell you that I'm doing that successfully, but it's something that I work on every day. And a lot of it is just living in this amazing place that we call Taos, New Mexico.
Don, thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.
And there you go, my friends. Thus concludes my conversation with David Graham. I've always had a fond spot in my heart for photography because when I was growing up, my father shot 8mm movies, and he also had a darkroom. And when I was a little boy, I would sneak into the darkroom and see what it was all about. I wasn't supposed to be in there. It was prohibited. And yet, I did it anyway. I don't remember owning a camera in high school. I do remember somewhere in the mid-70s, 1974, 75, I bought my first camera. It was a Mamiya 35mm camera. I was inspired to take pictures, maybe because of the memory of my father's pictures, or because by that time I had started reading the magazines, trying to get myself up to speed on current events. I read Newsweek, Time, Look, National Geographic, and I imagine those photographs in those magazines may have influenced me into my curiosity around photography. I did hold a vivid memory, as I still do today, of looking in my father's photo collection and seeing the old photographs he took during his time as a soldier in World War II. He was at the Battle of the Bulge, and he was also part of the troops going through Europe liberating the concentration camps. I even now have a vivid memory of looking at those old black and white photos of the concentration camps, the wagons, the ovens, the people staring out from behind the fences. And there were a few photos of him with his buddies standing around the jeeps, sort of smiling, hanging out, waiting for the next thing to happen. There are people today who will tell you that all of that tragedy in Germany never happened. It's a figment of history's imagination. Those images in my father's darkroom seared into my imagination, which still sit there to this day, left no doubt in my mind of how cruel people can be. On the opposite side of cruelty, generosity also exists in photographs. Now that everybody has a smartphone, I'm thinking of one of the most common photographs you see. And those photographs are always almost the same. If you haven't guessed it yet, here it is. A group of people sitting around a table in a restaurant, having dessert and coffee, smiling up at the camera while the person who served the meal is usually taking the photograph. Why would I offer that setting as an example of generosity in photography? Think of it as generosity because the people around the table want to record this warm environment they are in. They want to record the time. They want to record all of the interactions between each of them, the fun they had, a little historical record left behind for somebody maybe to look at or for the people in the shot to remember the event by. While I imagine people have been doing this for years, now that we have our smartphones, it's easy to do, so it's a natural inclination to move in that direction, to record something historical, something seemingly insignificant, and yet the generosity around the table after people have been visiting for a while is usually at its highest tone. Most of these after-dinner around-the-table photographs are snapshots, valuable to the people who are around the table, but not particularly interesting to other folks beyond the circle. Most of the photographs you see from this category look almost exactly the same. The people are different, but the layout is the same. Sometimes the photograph switches from after the meal to just before the meal. They're gazing at the camera with anticipation on their faces. If the shot happens after the meal, you see satisfaction on their faces. So why do all of these photographs you see taken in restaurants and locations all over the world have the same vibe, all look the same, have the same story? That's because each one is telling the same story. There's one theme. We are happy in the restaurant, sitting together, looking at the camera. And most of the time, people all have the same thing in common. They're presenting their public face, what they think they're supposed to look like in a photograph. You might be wondering how I know this. Well, it's pretty simple. I've done it many times myself, sitting around a table looking at a camera, presenting my public face, what I think I'm supposed to look like in a photograph with a group of people around a table. So why are all these photographs the same? It's because there's no decisive moment in the photograph that tells a story. The idea for the decisive moment comes from the French photographer Henri Cartier-Bresson, and his idea was to use a small Leica camera and take unposed candid photography. He captured people in motion, the fleeting expressions, the unexpected juxtapositions. He said, To me, photography is the simulation recognition in a fraction of a second of the significance of an event as well as of a precise organization of forms. He had no interest in the static portrait. He was always looking for fluid, artistic responses to life as it happens. So I've always wondered how Cartier-Bresson would seek out the decisive moments in those photographs of people around tables in restaurants. Many of those shots remind me of the photographs taken in the late 1800s, where people had to sit or stand very still while they waited for the camera to record the light, which sometimes took a second or 2 seconds, maybe sometimes 3. I think it's a bit ironic that in this day of modern photography and smartphones, people sit still like they were living in the late 1800s. Like I said, I've done it too, so I know exactly how it feels. Basically, when people pose like that, there's a self-consciousness in their faces, and it gets captured collectively. And I think that's what makes these photographs all look the same. I suspect the decisive moments in one of those photographs happen just after the photographer snaps the shot and people relax. So it might be interesting to shoot a second shot after the first shot was done and see what comes up. I suspect somebody's done that before, but probably not all that often. So if you find yourself in a situation at a table like I've been talking about, what might you do in that scene to create a decisive moment for yourself? The first instinct might be to hold a cup upside down dramatically or stare at the ceiling like you're trying to see the stars above the rooftops. This might change the vibe of the photograph, but it still would likely be leaning in the direction of performativity, more external than internal. So on that note, I have a small photographic tip for you when you're having your photograph taken, regardless of whether you're around a table with a group of friends or alone just looking at the camera. This tip comes from a few years ago when I was with a group of people. We were shooting some promotional photographs. I was posing, doing that external, stiff, self-conscious, this is how I should look in a photograph that is a promotional photograph that wants to get people's attention. Of course, when you're stiff and you're self-conscious and you're trying to get people's attention, the exact opposite happens. You show up wooden without much personality because the you of who you are deeper inside isn't showing itself. And that was exactly what was happening to me. The photographs were not coming out very well, and I wasn't sure why that was happening like that. That was when I got one of the best photographic tips I've ever had. The photographer said, "Look, you are just too stiff. Here's what I want you to do. Squeeze your butt cheeks," which is a humorous way of saying tighten your glutes. You've probably heard that if you've ever taken a yoga class. So on the next round, I did tighten my glutes. And sure enough, as soon as I tightened my glutes, the self-consciousness disappeared from my face, and the more natural look that the photographer was asking me to provide made its appearance. I've used that technique many times, and in fact, when I'm in a restaurant and someone asks us to all pose for the photograph, I'm always squeezing my glutes while the photograph is being taken, and it works. The self-consciousness goes out of the face. You don't necessarily have to squeeze your butt cheeks, tighten your glutes to get the self-consciousness out of your face. You can tap your knee or pat your foot lightly on the floor. When you take those little actions that have a physical connection to your body, your face will relax and you will seem more natural. Food photography is a big deal, and I'm sure there are plenty of photographs of people sitting around tables that have artistic relevance. So the next time somebody pulls you aside and asks you to take a picture of their group around the table, or maybe ask you to take a picture of them at an overlook on the Blue Ridge Parkway, wherever the setting, next time you have an opportunity to do that, think about the decisive moment. How would you take that photograph? One of the tricks I do when people ask me to take a photograph, I don't just take one. I snap a whole bunch of them back to back. And what usually happens is the folks put their guard up, present their public face when they think they're having their photograph taken. So here's the trick. Seconds before and seconds afterwards, people relax. They don't put that public face up. And so if you can catch a few snaps before and after, and then when you give the camera back to the folks who ask you to take the shot, they'll likely find something in that collection that you shot that they will be very happy to show their other friends. So the next time someone photographs you, squeeze your butt cheeks, tighten your glutes up, relax, and there's a good chance you'll end up with a photograph that you'll like quite a bit. We're almost at the end of the show. Before I close, I would like to offer you a poem, a snapshot by Gwendolyn Brooks titled The Bean Eaters, and it's a scene around a table. This poem, The Bean Eaters by Gwendolyn Brooks, is a good example of how you can capture an image with words in the same way that a camera can capture an image with light. They eat beans mostly, this old yellow pair. Dinner is a casual affair, plain chipware on a plain and creaking wood, tin flatware. Two who are mostly good, two who have lived their day, two who are mostly good, two who have lived their day, but keep on putting on their clothes and putting things away and remembering with twinklings and twinges as they lean over the beans in their rented back room that is full of beads and receipts and dolls and cloths, tobacco crumbs, vases, and fringes. And that was The Bean Eaters by William. And that was The Bean Eaters by Gwendolyn. And that was The Bean Eaters by Gwendolyn. And that was The Bean Eaters by Gwendolyn Brooks. They eat beans mostly, this old yellow pair. Dinner is a casual affair. Plain chipware on a plain and creaking wood. Tin flatware. Two who are mostly good. Two who have lived their day, but keep putting on their clothes and putting things away, and remembering with twinklings and twinges as they lean over their beans in their rented back room that is full of beads and receipts and dolls and cloths, tobacco crumbs, vases, and fringes. The Bean Eaters by Gwendolyn Brooks. So there's a poetry snapshot of two people at a table. It can be anything. We eat 3 times a day. You could spend the rest of your life taking photographs of people at tables. It's an interesting approach to making something artistic. Maybe you'll try it. I'm curious. I wonder what it'll look like. You tell me. And on that note, I'd like to say thank you ever so much for listening to Twice 5 Miles Radio. I hope you did enjoy the information that Don gave us about photography. And maybe the next time you have an opportunity to be in a photograph, you will squeeze those glutes and that self-consciousness will drop down into your body and you will show everybody in the world who you are. This show airs every weekend on WPVM FM Radio Asheville and KCEI Cultural Energy Radio in Taos. Thank you, Walter Parks, for our theme song, walterparks.com for more on Walter's music. Thank you, Davine Dial, for managing WPVM FM in Asheville, and Robin Collier for doing the same in Taos, New Mexico. You can always reach out to me, Navé, at jamesnavé.com. Navé is spelled Nave. I would love to hear from you wherever you are in the world. I'm curious, how far does this show range? You can tell me that because I have no idea. Navé at jamesnavé.com. And where are you? I'd also like to remind you that if you like writing and would like to improve your writing, I host a free Imaginative Storm writing gathering on Zoom every Thursday, 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and every Saturday, 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern Time. It's on Zoom. It's always free. Great gathering of people. We generate 10 minutes worth of timed writing, and we have an hour to play around with it. So it's good fun. You can always go to imaginativestorm.com for the link to that free workshop. And after we finish generating writing, we spend a bit of time having a salon conversation. It's an open-ended conversation. Somebody brings up a subject and the whole group tracks it. It's quite fun. Maybe you'll have time at some point to join us. I hope so. And once again, thanks so much for tuning in to Twice 5 Miles Radio. I do hope you return very soon. Until then, maybe I'll catch you on that turnaround somewhere down the line. Here's Big John Scherer walking down Freedom Road.
I'm gonna let nobody turn me round, no, no, no. know I got good religion. I didn't get it in a dream. Wake me in the midnight hour, I'll tell you just what I mean. I'm gonna let nobody turn me round, no, 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 turn me round, turn me round. I'm gonna let nobody turn me round. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, walking down Freedom Road. Now you know I would not live a sinner. I'll tell you the reason why. Just suppose the good Lord was to call my name, I wouldn't be ready to die. I'm gonna let nobody turn me round, no, 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 turn me round, who turn me round. I'm gonna let nobody turn me round. I'm gonna keep on walking, I keep on talking, walking down Freedom Road. Now you know I got good religion. I got it when I was young. I'm sanctified and filled with the Holy Ghost. The devil can't do me no wrong. I'm gonna let nobody turn me round. I don't know, turn me round, turn me round. I'm gonna let nobody turn me round. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, walking down Freedom Road. I'm gonna walk down